What's up, guys? My name is Neo Blitz. This is my intro to Python series. This will be a series talking about the details and the ins and outs of Python. And let's just jump right into it. To get us started, let's talk a little bit about the data types in Python. There are 4 data types in Python, and those types are in order: string, integer, float, and bool. Before we get into anything else, let's talk a little bit about each. The first one we're going to talk about is strings. Strings are also known as a sequence of characters, but in layman's terms, it just means that it can contain letters, numbers, and it can even contain special symbols. One thing that gets a lot of people about strings is that strings have to be in quotation marks. It does not matter what is inside of those quotation marks, as long as it is inside of quotation marks, it is a string. And with strings, there is a limited selection of the math operators that can actually be done on them. Next, we're going to talk about integers. Integers are any whole numbers. They can be positive or negative, or they can be used for doing math, and they can be used for doing math and other operations. One thing about whole numbers that kind of gets some people is that integers can be numbers in general when you're talking about math, but in computer science, they can't have the decimal points. Another common mistake is to put them in quotation marks, but once again, that makes them a string. And under normal circumstances, you cannot add an integer to a string. Next, let's talk about floats. Floats are numbers that contain a decimal point. That's pretty self-explanatory, but one thing that is often confused is that when doing math with one float in Python, both numbers are turned into a float at the end. And another reminder that you cannot put floats inside of quotation marks or add them to strings under normal circumstances. Last but certainly not least, let's talk about bools. Bools are probably the least used outside of conditional statements and operators, but Boolean variables can only contain true or false. One thing that I think a lot of people kind of forget when dealing with bools is that they're only really looked at as 1 and 0. True being 1, false being 0. There are a lot of things you can do a bool, but for the sake of simplicity, it will only be talked about once we get to actual use of it. Before we get into some examples, let me go over a couple things I almost missed. The green text that you see behind the hashtag is called a comment. Comments do not run when you run your code, and they kind of just help you organize ideas or label things for later. And one last thing, let's talk about variables. What is a variable, you might ask? A variable is a storage space. Think of it like a box. Once you put something in that box and you name it, when you come back to that box, it will have the same thing in it, but it will be referred to by its name. With that in mind, let's hop into some examples. First thing, let's do a string. So, like I said, strings have to be inside of quotation marks, right? So, let's start off by saying hello world. If I go back and I try to print what's in the box, it won't print string example, it'll just print hello world. Just to give another example, say I wanted to put a number inside of a string. I could have the name 34. When I run this, what will it give me back? If you guess that it'll give me back the 34, then you're right. But what's special about this 34? It's inside a quotation mark, so this is a string and not an integer. Alright, let's give one more example. And I'm just going to say we have this floating point number, which will be 3.14. And like always, this is 3.14, I'm sorry, but this is a string and not a float. Now that we've talked a little bit about strings, let's talk about the other data types and give a few examples of those. In my next video, I will go through and do operations on each data type, but for now, let's just focus on trying to see the data types as they are. So, since we finished string, let's go to integer. Int, also known as integer, is pretty simple. So let's just say we want to name our variable my number. So let's use the number 3. Just like with strings, if I were to print this, it prints out the exact same as a string would. In some cases, they can look slightly different, but we'll talk more about that in later lessons. The only difference right now between the string and the int is inside of the code itself and not how it prints out visually. That being said, let's do a couple more examples of integers and then we'll move on to floats. And let's do one more. And let's just do one for my number. Alright. As you can see. Now let's see bool. I'm sorry, not bool. Let's see float. And later we will see bool. So just like we said before, it is as simple as just putting a decimal point behind it. So let's do 2 more floats. And I'm just gonna put 2 and 3. And my float 3. A common error that does happen a lot is that sometimes people will type it differently than the way that they typed it originally. If you type it any different from the way that it was originally, it will cause an error, and you have to be specific. You have to specifically type it the way you typed it originally. Last but not least, we're gonna go with bool, which only has 2 values. And they will print out as let me fix that. Alright. That's it for this video. Next time I'm going to be covering math operations, and a little bit more about what bools can actually do. Thank you for watching. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Peace.